Welcome to the DataStack Show. Each week, we explore the world of data by talking to the people shaping its future. You'll learn about new data technology and trends and how data teams and processes are run at top companies. The DataStack Show is brought to you by RudderStack, the CDP for developers. You can learn more at RudderStack.com. Welcome back to the DataStack Show, recording on-site at Data Council Austin. We are having a blast with the microphones set up in this side room, and we're grabbing all the cool people that we can find to come in and record episodes. And today, we are talking with James Greenhill from PostHog, and he is the platform team leader there. And I'm super excited to talk with James. I think one of the things that I am really interested in is what are the challenges that we don't think about when you're building a product analytics tool, right? I mean, you're a data person building a data tool for people working with data. And I think that there are probably a lot of things that we don't necessarily think about. Because product analytics on some level seems straightforward. You record some sort of instrumentation and then you send the data through and then you look at the data and figure out if this feature is working or not, right? But there's probably a lot more under the hood and some decisions that have to be made that are probably pretty difficult. So that is what I want to ask James about. How about you, Kostas?
Two things. One, I definitely want to have a conversation with him about like the concept of platform inside like an organization. It's like one of these things like the platform teams and like that's they arise as a way of like organizing engineering. That's like very interesting. And I'd love like to hear about how it is implemented in PostHog. And then of course, learn more about the technology itself. And hopefully we will also have some time to talk a little bit more about product analytics in general and what it means and where the problems are and how you can, do them properly, because it's really, it's one of these things that like everyone wants to do and it gets messy very, very fast. So yeah, let's see what we can learn.
James, welcome to the DataStack Show. We're so excited to chat with you.
Glad to be here.
And we are actually on site again at Data Council Austin in person. So fun to record. And you are head of platform at PostHog. So we want to hear about that, but tell us how you got to that point. Where'd you start your career? How'd you end up working in data?
Oh yeah, so I've got a really interesting story arc for my career. Basically, I started out as a data analyst, data scientist really at Grooveshark forever ago.
No way.
Yeah.
Man, I definitely remember Grooveshark.
Yeah. So basically joined there. My entire initiative there was to make the data more, or make the company more data driven. So I reported directly to the CTO, Josh Greenberg, and had a bunch of initiatives. I had this newsletter called The Shark Chum that I sent out every week. But nice. Very quickly it became apparent that we had basically no data infrastructure at all. So I was scratching an itch, started getting data engineering just to serve myself. Went down that track, ended up at Discuss for 4 years, building out the data infrastructure there. Was actually originally hired there as a data scientist. Okay. Did the exact same thing. What's funny about that was we started out with the VP of product. The entire suite of reporting was a Python script that hit a Postgres instance that spat out static HTML on a cron job. So basically, my first thing was like, nope, that's got to go. Set up Hadoop. Did all sorts of stuff for 4 years, ended up converting that company. Like that was what we ended up monetizing at the end of the day. We tried a couple things with like ad platforms, but basically the data was the best thing that we had. I remember I actually was a Discuss user. Yeah. And I kind of remember that. Like, that was really interesting as a user. So. Yeah, well, we were basically the largest, we were all over the internet. And they basically still are, but at the time it was like peak Discuss. Totally. And we had the largest Google Analytics account that Google Analytics had. Really? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had 1 billion uniques with 10 billion page views a month, which was pretty great. I used to joke with people, like, it was great for recruiting because I was like, hey, you could join this company and we have by far the most uniques per engineer than any other company out there for sure. But yeah, like we basically, it started out originally as like understanding how people use the product. And then it was like, okay, well, maybe we could turn this into an ad platform using this data. And then finally, it was just like, well, actually, we have a really good persona just from people. Like, we're scattered throughout the internet. We know what people kind of want, and we can bundle that up into nice personas that we can kind of help people target better with. So that was 4 years of my life, and then I ended up being like, okay, well, I kind of want to play with product engineering. Went over to Silicon Valley. Well, actually, I went to a company that was acquired by Silicon Valley Bank, Standard Treasury, a closure shop of all things, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, did product engineering. Did the worked on the integration for I don't know if you know Stripe Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's basically this product that allows you to spin up a company with like a Delaware C Corp and all this stuff really easily. Yeah. It's great. It's a great product. But we were one of their partners for the banking side.
Oh, wow.
And so I helped build out the back end for that. Really fun, but working in a bank is really tough. Very, very slow moving. Also kind of wanted to get back into data. So ended up back over at, or actually I started, really interesting. I ended up at Uber working on the self-driving cars. So,
really?
Yeah, the autonomous cars. So I was at Uber ATG and basically handling the real-time telemetry coming from the trucks. So the idea there, the goal was we had these cars driving around, but they really weren't getting utilized very well. They were breaking down for various reasons, and we wanted to understand why and how we could improve the utilization of the fleet. And we did that via real-time analytics, pretty much. And so I worked on building that out, which was a ton of fun, really interesting. But then we bought Jump, and I'm a cyclist at heart. Like, I love cycling. One of the reasons why I live in San Francisco, it's just like perfect weather all the time for cycling.
Yeah.
But basically, I was like, yes, I definitely want to help here. I believe in the mission. Really fun, and the product's fantastic, and I would use it every day. So I went over to Jump, basically led the integration of the Jump infrastructure into Uber's infrastructure, throwing over all the pipes for getting like usage data into us, and built out a team doing that, as well as doing reporting for cities. So it was kind of a quid pro quo with Jump. Like, the entire license that we got to operate in cities was in exchange for data. Mm-hmm. So we would go to a city and be like, hey, like, we would love to launch Jump in your city, but in exchange, like, we know that this is like, you want something back from us. But so what we'll do is we'll tell people like where people are writing, and you can use that to develop your infrastructure.
Super
Understand like where, it was super like.
That's a neat like public-private partnership.
Yeah, no, it was really good. Cities loved us for that because it was very difficult to get otherwise. Strava actually did this as well later in their career. It was really cool to see cities like say, we would love to understand where we should be putting bike lanes based on where people are actually biking. Like, that's really helpful.
It's like the cow path theory, right? Mm-hmm. Like, let people like.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. So it was very organic. It was very data driven, which is like surprising for cities, but I love it. The other thing was enable, like, one of the generally as part of getting the license, they would want to serve underserved areas as well, like enabling people to move around the city,
Sure.
And so that was a way for us to prove that we were doing this.
Yep.
Which was really, really great. And then after that, we ended up about 2.5 years ago getting like through a deal moving everything over to Lime, and Lime's a scooter company. I'm not really as big in the scooters. So I started looking around for companies, and I found PostHog. So PostHog, the story there is really interesting. I basically saw them. I basically saw them on GitHub, and I started them. Like, basically, showed up on Hacker News. I'm a big fan of Hacker News.
I remember this.
Yeah, I remember this. The launch.
Yeah, totally.
So basically, I saw them on Hacker News. I started them on GitHub.
Yep.
And James Hawkins, the co-founder, likes to procrastinate, and one of the things that he does when he procrastinates is he looks at the GitHub stars to see like who's liking the repo.
But that's like such a wonderful like founder procrastination.
Oh yeah, no, he does the same thing. Like, the other thing that he does when he procrastinates is like checks LinkedIn and just networks. Like, that's what he does to like not do whatever he's supposed to be doing at the moment, which is great. Yeah. Really great for growth, really great for networking. But anyways, he was like, hey, you work at Uber. Do you mind like looking at a product and maybe doing an investor reference call or something? And I was like, yeah, I'd love to. Like, I'm a huge fan of the product already. This is absolutely something that I would use at Uber if I was like trying to instrument product analytics. It's something that I've been doing forever. Like, if you were to ask me like the one thing that I've done like 10 times over in my career is like, you walk into a company, they're like, we don't have any data, and what do you want to do with the data? Well, we'd love to make a funnel. We want to understand like where people, like, that's what everyone wants to understand with their app is like, how are people entering my app? how are they converting to being a paid user? Were they having good and bad experiences? And how can I like allocate my resources to improve the experience?
Yep.
So we had done that. We had actually done like a code yellow at Uber with Jump because the experience was kind of shoddy in certain times. We had some VIP users who were using the product and they'd be like, why isn't this thing working? So we did this like, all hands on deck, like build out a funnel thing to understand like where people were having issues.
Yep.
Anyways, I was a huge fan of the product. I did a couple investor reference checks, and then I was like, you should hire me. And the rest is basically history.
Nice.
So I now work there. I lead the platform team. I help basically with the infrastructure side and the ingestion side. So it's making sure that we collect events, that no events are lost, that they show up into the data warehouse on time, and that the entire stack is easily deployable either on cloud for us or for our customers who want to host it on-prem. And that's the TLDR.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to ask one question, and Kostas, I know you have a ton. So did you have to come in and build the analytics funnel for an analytics company when you came into PostHog?
Surprisingly, no. No, it was the first time I did not have to do that. It was built originally. We had to rebuild it, but there was already a funnel that was just built on Postgres. It was just a little slow. It was good for like small installs, but we did have to do it eventually.
Yeah, totally. No, it's always funny. Like, and we talk about that and what we do as well. It's like sometimes you have like a cobbler's shoes type situation, you know, especially in the early stages, where it's like, that's awesome. All right, Kostas. I've been monopolizing, so please.
It's fine. It's fine. You're doing an amazing job as always. So let's talk a little bit about like PostHog and the product experience of PostHog, right? Like, what is it, and like how it's also like different compared to I don't know what other like solutions are out there, right?
Well, the main thing is we're open source. There's not really any product analytics out of the box that handles open source product analytics like. Especially at scale like we do. We've heavily tied, or we've bet the farm, I like to say, on ClickHouse, and it's been really great for us. It's what Yandex used for Metrica, which is their Google Analytics. And so it's very used to scale, and it works great for us. It's relatively easy to host our stack locally. And other than that, like we have a bunch of, I think something that is a little different from most of our competition is that we tack on a lot of extras onto it because we believe that like it's kind of like the entire thing that we see with like the modern data stack currently, which is like everything lives in your warehouse and you're able to like leverage that data in the warehouse to power other tools, other data tools. So we have a feature flagging suite in there and experiments based on that. So those are all powered by the data that you put into PostHog. So if you emit a bunch of data, you can say like only use this feature flag, only enable this feature flag for this product if the user is like a high frequency user or uses this specific thing or is part of this group. You can go super deep with that. Like you can base it on properties that are on the user, properties that are on events. So like we've made it so that like there are all of these tangentially related products that are powered by the data that you send PostHog, but are kind of separate products by themselves. Yeah. So that's another, like between those two, I'd say that those are our two primary differentiators between other products.
That's amazing. And then like how, if I want to use PostHog, is like, where is the data stored? Is the data like stored in something that it's, let's say a storage layer that's not proprietary, but it's built by PostHog?
Yes. Yeah.
Or is it something where I can use, like I can attach my own data warehouse there?
¿Por qué no los dos? Basically, yes, you can do both. By default, it goes into ClickHouse with a schema that's kind of like blessed by us. That schema is always changing a little. It's changing slightly as we try to make it a little bit more performant and leverage ClickHouse features a little bit more as they come out. But we also have a feature that allows you to kind of tee off all of your events from the flow into a data warehouse of your choice. So as the events come in, you can say like, it doesn't impact the flow into ClickHouse at all. So our product keeps going, but like let's say you want to use that to augment the data that you have in your own warehouse, whether it be on Google GCP, BigQuery, or Snowflake, or Redshift, or Postgres, or wherever you want it. Like you can basically the way that we do that is via plugins, and you can build these plugins yourself. So if you're someone who uses like DB2 for whatever reason, and you want your data to be in DB2, you can do it. You just need to have that plugin and put it into a repo and point your PostHog install to it.
And why do we even have like product analytics? Why it's not just like part of analytics in general? Like what's so special about product itself in terms of like the analytics needs that we have? That's one question. And the second question is why do we need like a specialized storage layer for that instead of using, I don't know, like in general, like warehouse or something like that?
That's a really good question. So the first one, like how is it different from how is product analytics different from analytics and like specifically for PostHog? It's a little different because with analytics, like Google Analytics, you're really looking at like attribution. You're looking at how are people showing up at your app. It's very good for marketing. For product analytics, things like Mixpanel or an Amplitude or Heap is really interested in like how are people using your app. Like, and are they having a good experience? And are they converting? And retention, like, are people sticking around? So they're subtly different, but they really are different use cases, and different personas are going to use both of those products. Now, for the storage layer, we did originally just use Postgres, and it worked really well. And we moved on to like a data warehouse, like you were saying, which we think is going to be a data warehouse in the long term. So ClickHouse is like an OLAP database that you might compare it with like a Druid or a Pinot, but I think the direction that it's going in is probably going to end up more like a Snowflake in the long term. So you can host it, but the difference is you can host it yourself, and it's actually kind of like Starburst. It's very, very similar. It's just our constraint. We would have chosen. We would have entertained those other options a little more. But one of the constraints that we had with choosing the warehouse was making it easy to deploy on-prem for a smaller company. So putting it in a Helm chart and shipping it is much easier with ClickHouse than it is with like the entire potentially HDFS stack, which a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises might have been more comfortable with. But we were really optimizing for just like turnkey efficiency with the product.
Makes sense. And let's talk a little bit about the capturing and collection of product data, right? We talked about like how to store this data there, but I've seen many times, and I'm sure like Eric also has seen that the first time that you try to instrument your product, it's always like a huge data modeling mess.
I've
like,
never experienced that. It's like, no.
And
doing that 10 times, like every time.
And like what
Really
is like what I find amazing is that like people are like, okay, let's just instrument everything. Like let's put like every possible like event that we have in there, and you end up like with a soup of just noise that you don't know what to do with it. And to be honest, like
it's pure gluttony.
It's hoarding. I call it data hoarding.
And to be honest, like I have reached like the opposite direction right now, where I'm like, let's start with just sign up, just capture one thing. Let's see this coming in, do something with it, and then let's add another thing. Be more a little bit more incremental. But the reason like I'm talking about that is because instrumenting like a product is one of these things that like you need like a lot of technology to do it, and we talked about that, like why we need like specialized storage, like specialized UIs, like to do like the querying and all these things. But you end up in a situation where like all these might be completely wasted if you don't model and do the instrumentation right. Like have like a process and so. Help us like understand how we should be approaching these as like product people out there, and how we should build this instrumentation process and maintain it.
Yeah, I think the real thing is you're absolutely right with people basically just kind of throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks in terms of instrumenting their app. I think educating engineers on what they should instrument the app is like step one. Having a good taxonomy on what the metrics should be, what the events emitted should be, is huge. That's something that we're working on currently, is trying to like surface what events are being emitted so that engineers know like, you don't end up with the classic case of like checked out, sale complete, sale, like all these events being emitted that mean the same thing but are being emitted in different locations with different terms, and so they're not getting captured right. So like the taxonomy thing is really, really a difficult thing. And I think over time you're going to find that engineers are going to be involved in this more and more. And as engineers are also becoming more product minded, you're going to see them scratching their own itch, and you'll probably see the hygiene of this improve anyways. But there is a problem. I think there are kind of two solutions to it. One is education, and I've seen like linting done on the front end, where like as you change a metric, like something that's being emitted, it's like, hey, like this is a new type of event you may be emitting. Are you sure you want to add this? Like here are other things that are like maybe similar. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is consulting on the back end, which is I feel like what most people do
Yeah.
now, which is like, okay, like we've all made mistakes, and so I'm just going to combine these all into one metric or one event category. So I think catching it earlier is better. We're going to push people towards that because you get more value out of it, and I think you get a lot more engagement from the engineers that are implementing this. Because if you can get engineers bought in and make it easy for them to instrument the app, you're going to have better metrics in general. Like it's just a good thing. But yeah, it's just a problem.
100%.
I have a question on that actually, especially related to the way that you think about PostHog as a platform. And I'm thinking about this from the standpoint of having used tons of different product analytics tools, right? So. Yeah. Even if you've done taxonomy before and you start with like a pretty good taxonomy, things change, things grow, like the app itself changes, right? You try new things, right? And so there's inevitably some sort of data drift, like even if you work at it pretty hard, right? It's just the nature of the business. Yeah. So what's interesting is like the basic product analytics tools and like the visualization components are built for sort of like a really clean taxonomy, which makes sense, right? And so there's kind of this whole other feature set actually that, some products do well and some do really poorly, like product analytics products, around like, okay, if that happens, like if you have drift and you need to fix it because like, guess what? Now your visualizations have problems, right? Yeah. How do you think about that feature set? Because it's sort of this like hidden, but like really critical thing that's like, pretty hard. I don't know. It's hard to think about like how you consider that feature set in a platform like PostHog.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've kind of prototyped, it may be released pretty soon. I'm not sure. It's kind of in like super alpha phase. Is the idea of trying to consolidate these and categorize them together. So it surfaces all the different types of events that you've emitted with their context, and it tries its best to consolidate, capture them together. So it's like, well, these all look like, sale events, or these are all page view or impression events. Yep. And then it kind of helps an engineer or analyst, or product person go in there and be like, oh yeah, these are, and then immediately that becomes one consolidated thing. Got it. Yeah, it's a tough problem. And if you're like in a warehouse, I think the best thing to do would be to have some sort of I don't even know if there is something out there like that, but it'd be kind of like a data catalog or data management system product that surfaces the dimensions for every column. So it's like, okay, like these are the events, and some sort of distribution of those events. And you could probably, I imagine in every company you see some long tail of garbled event titles. But yeah,
a lot of companies I think just fix that in SQL, right?
Basically, that would traditionally, that's how I would do it. Yep. Like if you were to pick me up and put me back in time, you'd be like, well, there's another Airflow job or whatever.
Super interesting. Yeah. And do you view those decisions as sort of unchangeable, right? Like you decide, because that's another big question, right? Like you decide that there's these particular events essentially need to be consolidated to represent one thing. Should you be able to reverse that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Typically, going back and rewriting data, it sounds nice. I very rarely have seen this actually work, people do it. Going back and just rewriting data to fix these types of things. Usually you end up with some sort of lookup where it's between these dates and this event name, it equals this, refine a term. So and that way, you're not destroying any data. You're just kind of adapting it. So I've seen that work, but it does get burdensome. It can get pretty heavy.
Yeah, it's like one of those things where if your hands are on all the controls, you can kind of massage it, but from a product perspective, it's when you're on some level you have to make some decisions for the end user, right? Yeah. Or you have to give them options, which is hard. So yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I really we don't do this, but I really like the idea of having the linter and being hey, before you even get it into production, it's whoa, we think that this is either are you sure you want to emit this new type of event? Yeah. Here are the other events that this might fall into. That would be perfect.
Yeah, it's the angel on your shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. Or in the blocker. It's no. This is. Don't do this.
Last question from me. So discussing about instrumentation and all this mess that we can end up with, do you think that we should start from the metric and end up on what kind of actions we should record? Ooh. Or do the opposite, start from the event and
Ooh, that's a
then
great question.
That is a really good question.
it's
That's a fundamental question.
yeah, like that's why I kept it for the last
great.
question.
Ideally, we know exactly what we want to measure all the time.
Of course, I mean, we are business leaders.
Yeah, exactly. And we know everything. Yeah, we know every hypothesis that we want to test from day one. I wish, but yeah, typically I think you're going to end up with going in and being like, well, I have this hypothesis. Let me instrument the app in this way and test it, and then you'll get a result, and you'll be like, oh, cool, or ooh, and then you'll hopefully pull those events out if you don't need them anymore. Maybe you keep them in and track them over time. But yeah, I think typically there's going to be some level of being proactive in your metrics. Where it's like, yeah, obviously you want to do sales, impressions, stuff like that. Person clicks on the pricing page, and then you're going to have very reactive stuff, which is like instrumenting the app, especially for performance or for like degraded like experience issues. You're going to go and do deep dives in bits of your app and be like, okay, well, I'm going to really heavily instrument it in this section because we know, like maybe through your other product analytics, you know that section is where people are dropping off and having bad experiences. Ideally, all of our client libraries for all these companies that do this type of thing, we'll start to be able to capture that context automatically, kind of like a Sentry type of thing. We kind of do this on the front end where it's like if there's a Sentry exception thrown, we can send an event to PostHog that says, hey, this person has an exception. We do session recording, and so you can see like the entire front start to finish for that session, like recorded from the DOM. If you have it enabled, and it'll be like the person had this issue here, and we're prototyping sending the console logs as well from the front end. So like the front end is kind of like in terms of like web, I think you'll probably see that happening more, where events are just automatically, like the reactive events are automatically captured because there's just so much context that's available. The back end, it's going to take a little longer. But I do think there will always probably be some amount of reactive event instrumentation happening.
Makes sense. I think it's also like a matter of how mature like the process and the company and the product is. Like, I mean, the earlier you are like in the life cycle of the product, where you are experimenting like pretty much like every day, like like you don't have the luxury to sit down and be like, okay, let's think of like what I'm going to measure, and then
You're too busy building a product.
I'm too too busy building the product, and now to be like also honest, like we don't know what we are doing. We're just trying to figure out what we should be doing. So it doesn't make that much sense like to start with like so strong assumptions and then trying to test them and like all these like nice things when you have found your product market fit and you're iterating on this fit to make it even stronger. So that's another, I think, important point for everyone to keep in mind. Eric,
I think we're at time, actually.
Yeah.
I think you actually have to go, unfortunately.
Yeah, I do.
James, this has been such a great conversation. I wish we could keep going because it's so interesting. But
fun.
thank you for sharing. I learned a ton. And what a journey you've had. So congrats on being a PostHog, and you've done some really cool stuff that's benefited a lot of people riding bikes around cities. So,
I love it. I actually rode a jump bike now a line bike in today here. So
very
nice.
cool.
It's like visiting an old friend.
Yes, I love it. All right, well, thanks for joining us.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for having me.